Constantinople, 453. The ancient walls that had protected the city for 1,000 years were finally crumbling under Ottoman cannons, and Commander Andreas Palaiologos stood ready to give his life defending what remained of the Byzantine Empire. His loyalty had never been questioned, his honor never doubted, his devotion to duty absolute. But when Emperor Constantine II had summoned him with urgent orders to investigate a conspiracy, someone was secretly negotiating with the enemy. Andreas had no idea that uncovering the truth would force him to choose between everything he believed about honor and a reality far more complicated than simple loyalty could solve. The investigation led Andreas through desperate nobles, terrified merchants, and exhausted soldiers, each carrying their own secrets as the city died around them. Every clue brought him closer to a traitor whose identity would shatter his understanding of betrayal itself, and to a truth about the siege that made him question whether defending the walls was the same thing as protecting the people trapped behind them. In Constantinople's final days, Andreas would discover that sometimes the greatest act of treason is the one committed by those who demand absolute loyalty, and that honor can become the enemy of everything worth defending. If you enjoy medieval stories full of action and intrigue, where the line between hero and traitor disappears in the chaos of war, subscribe to Medieval Tales and leave your like. Constantinople, April 1453. Andreas Palaiologos stood on the Theodosian walls as the sun rose over the Golden Horn, painting the massive Ottoman encampment in shades of crimson and gold. Below him, 100,000 enemy soldiers prepared for another day of siege, their white tents spreading across the hills like a vast shroud. The bronze cannons that had arrived 3 weeks ago sat in their positions, each one larger than a house, their barrels still warm from yesterday's bombardment. Andreas could smell gunpowder mixed with the salt air from the Bosporus, could hear the distant hammering as Turkish engineers built new siege towers through the night. At 32 years old, he commanded 300 men defending this section of wall, and every morning he walked the ramparts counting how many were still alive. The wall itself bore the scars of relentless assault, cracks spiderwebbed through stones that had stood for 1,000 years, patched hastily with timber and rubble by exhausted work crews. Andreas ran his hand along the ancient masonry, feeling the vibrations from the enemy camp, the tremors that never quite stopped anymore. His second-in-command, Costas, approached from the north tower, limping from a leg wound that refused to heal properly. The veteran was 53, gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen too many sieges. He carried a wooden cup of watered wine, which he offered to Andreas without speaking. They had long since run out of things to say about their situation. "How many deserted last night?" Andreas asked, though he already knew the answer from the morning count. Costas took a long drink before responding, his weathered face showing no judgment, only tired acceptance. 7 men. They took a fishing boat from the harbor. The Venetian patrol probably let them pass. Those merchants are already planning their own escape. Andreas felt the familiar anger rise in his chest, then forced it down. Desertion was a capital offense, but executing starving men for wanting to live seemed increasingly absurd when the entire city was dying by degrees. The imperial granaries were nearly empty. Bread was rationed to portions that barely sustained life, and people were eating rats in the poorer districts. His own soldiers looked like walking skeletons, their armor hanging loose on wasted frames. Andreas's younger brother Demetrios served as a courier for Emperor Constantine XIV, carrying messages between the palace and various defensive positions throughout the city. Andreas hadn't seen him in 5 days, which was unusual even given the chaos of the siege. Their mother Irene lived near the Church of the Holy Apostles, running a small scriptorium where she copied religious manuscripts with the desperate energy of someone preserving civilization's last fragments. Andreas tried to visit her weekly, bringing whatever food he could spare from his command rations, listening to her prayers for deliverance that sounded increasingly hollow. She always asked about Demetrios, worry creasing her lined face, and Andreas always lied and said his brother was fine, too busy with imperial business to visit. The truth was, Andreas didn't know where Demetrios was or what he was doing, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. The Ottoman bombardment began precisely at dawn, as it did every morning. The first cannon shot sounded like thunder splitting the earth, followed immediately by the shriek of the massive stone ball as it arced through the air. Andreas and Costas threw themselves flat on the rampart as the projectile struck 50 feet to their left, exploding a section of wall into fragments that rained down like deadly hail. The impact shook Andreas's teeth, filled his mouth with dust and the taste of pulverized stone. Before the debris settled, the second cannon fired, then the third, a rolling barrage that would continue until sunset. The Turks had learned that sustained fire was more effective than individual shots. It gave defenders no time to repair damage, no time to rest, no time to think about anything except survival. Andreas scrambled to his feet and ran toward the breach, shouting orders that were barely audible over the continuing bombardment. His men were already moving, dragging timber and sandbags to plug the gap before Ottoman infantry could exploit it. This was the rhythm of the siege. The walls came down piece by piece, and they rebuilt them piece by piece, a contest of destruction and desperate repair that everyone knew the defenders were losing. Mathematics didn't lie. The Ottomans had unlimited cannonballs, unlimited gunpowder, unlimited soldiers to throw at the walls. Constantinople had 50,000 defenders, dwindling supplies, and walls that grew weaker every day. Andreas had studied enough sieges to know how this would end, but he pushed the knowledge down, buried it beneath layers of duty and discipline, and the simple fact that he had nowhere else to go. By midday, the bombardment had created 3 new breaches in his section alone. Andreas worked alongside his men, hauling timber until his hands bled, his muscles screaming from exhaustion that never quite faded anymore. A cannonball struck the North Tower, killing 2 Genoese mercenaries instantly and wounding 4 others. The screaming of the wounded mixed with the roar of cannons, creating a symphony of violence that had become Constantinople's only music. Andreas helped carry the injured to the medical station, a converted warehouse where a Greek physician and 2 monks did what they could with almost no supplies. The doctor looked at Andreas with eyes that had gone dead from seeing too much suffering, and simply pointed to an empty corner where they could lay the wounded. Everyone knew most of them wouldn't survive the night. Andreas returned to the walls to find a messenger waiting for him, a young palace servant in imperial livery that was stained and torn. The boy couldn't have been more than 14, and his hand shook as he delivered the sealed letter. Andreas broke the wax and read Emperor Constantine's summons. He was to report to the Blachernae Palace immediately for a matter of urgent imperial security. The phrasing was carefully neutral, but Andreas had served long enough to recognize the weight behind those words. Urgent imperial security during a siege meant only one thing: betrayal. Someone was selling secrets to the Turks, or planning to open the gates, or negotiating surrender without authorization. Andreas felt his stomach tighten as he handed command to Kostas and followed the messenger through the city's winding streets. Constantinople looked like a dying patient trying to maintain dignity. People went about their daily routines with grim determination. Women carried water from public fountains. Merchants sold vegetables at prices nobody could afford. Priests led prayers in churches packed with refugees. But Andreas could see the fear in their faces, the way they flinched at every cannon shot, the way mothers held their children too tightly. He passed a food riot near the Forum of Constantine, imperial guards beating back a crowd of starving citizens with clubs and spear shafts. The violence was half-hearted on both sides, as if everyone was too exhausted for real passion. Andreas kept his head down and kept walking, guilt gnawing at him for having food when these people had nothing, for being a soldier when protection had become a cruel joke. The Blachernae Palace rose at the northwestern corner of the city, its golden domes still gleaming despite everything, a deliberate statement of defiance against the Ottoman siege. Andreas was led through marble corridors lined with mosaics depicting Byzantine emperors stretching back centuries, their faces stern and confident in ways no living man could manage anymore. He found Emperor Constantine Sorgenblendein in a private chamber overlooking the Sea of Marmara, standing at a window with his back to the door. The emperor was 48, but looked 70, his shoulders bent under invisible weight, his hair gone completely white in the past month. When he turned, Andreas saw eyes that held a terrible mixture of determination and despair, the look of a man who knew he was commanding a ghost. Constantine spoke without preamble, his voice rough from shouting orders over cannon fire. "We have a traitor among us, Andreas. Someone in a position of trust has been communicating with Sultan Mehmed, passing him information about our defenses, our troop positions, our supplies. 3 days ago, my spies intercepted a coded message being smuggled out through the harbor. We decoded it yesterday." He handed Andreas a piece of parchment covered in Greek text that had clearly been copied from something else. Andreas read it slowly, his heart sinking with each line. The message detailed weak points in the southern walls, estimated troop numbers for each defensive sector, and proposed terms for a negotiated surrender that would spare civilian lives in exchange for opening specific gates at a predetermined time. "The traitor is someone close to the imperial court," Constantine continued, his voice hardening with anger. "Someone with access to military intelligence and diplomatic channels. I'm giving you full authority to investigate. Question anyone you need to question. Go anywhere you need to go. Find this person, Andreas. Find them before they can complete whatever arrangement they're making with the Turks. And when you find them, I want them brought to me alive so they can face justice publicly. The people need to see that betrayal has consequences, that we still have order and law, even as the world burns around us." Andreas looked at the emperor and saw something that frightened him more than the Ottoman army. He saw a man clinging to symbols and principles because he had nothing else left to cling to. Andreas accepted the mission because refusing wasn't possible, because duty was the only thing that made sense anymore, because investigation was better than standing on walls waiting for them to collapse. But as he left the palace with the decoded message in his hand, he felt a cold dread settling in his chest. Whoever the traitor was, they weren't acting from simple greed or cowardice. The proposed terms suggested someone trying to save lives, someone who had looked at the same mathematics Andreas saw every day and drawn the logical conclusion. And that made them far more dangerous than any ordinary criminal, because traitors with noble motives were the hardest to condemn and the easiest to become. Andreas began his investigation in the Imperial Archives, a cavernous chamber beneath the palace where centuries of documents moldered in the damp air. The chief archivist, a hunched monk named Theophilus, showed him records of everyone who had accessed military intelligence in the past 3 months. The list was shorter than Andreas expected, but more troubling. Only 12 people had the necessary clearance, and most were either dead from the siege or too physically broken to conduct secret negotiations. Andreas studied the names by candlelight, his finger stopping on one entry that made his breath catch. Dimitrios Palaiologos had requested defensive maps and troop deployment records 17 times in the past month, far more than his courier duties required. Andreas told himself there had to be an innocent explanation, that his brother served the emperor loyally, that suspicion, without evidence, was paranoia, born of exhaustion and fear. He decided to investigate the others first, starting with Gregorios Notaras, the Grand Duke and the emperor's chief military advisor. Notaras lived in a mansion near the Hagia Sophia, surrounded by servants and guards, despite the city's collapse. Andreas found him in a study lined with books, a fat man of 60 who still dressed in silk robes and drank wine as if the siege was happening to someone else. When Andreas questioned him about the coded message, Notaras laughed bitterly and poured himself another cup. Of course, I've considered negotiating with Mehmed. Any rational person would. Constantine clings to fantasies of Western reinforcements that will never arrive, while real people starve and die. But secret negotiations? I'm too old and too visible for that kind of subtlety. If I wanted to surrender the city, I'd simply open the gates myself and face whatever consequences came. His honesty was almost offensive, but Andreas believed him. Notaras was too proud and too broken to lie convincingly. Andreas spent 2 days questioning merchants, ship captains, and minor nobles who had access to sensitive information. He learned that the Venetian quarter was quietly preparing to evacuate, that Genoese mercenaries were demanding payment in gold they knew didn't exist, that several prominent families had already smuggled children out of the city on fishing boats. Everyone was planning for defeat in their own way, making private arrangements and hedging bets, but none of it matched the specific details of the intercepted message. The traitor was someone with deeper access, someone who could move through the palace without suspicion, someone who understood both military strategy and diplomatic protocol. Andreas kept circling back to that list of 12 names, kept seeing his brother's handwriting in the archive records, kept pushing away the thought that was becoming harder to ignore. On the 3rd day, a Turkish cannonball breached the seawalls near the Golden Horn, and Andreas had to abandon his investigation to help organize emergency repairs. He worked through the night alongside masons and soldiers, filling the gap with rubble and timber, while Ottoman archers fired volleys to disrupt their work. 2 men died beside him, one from an arrow through the throat, and another crushed when a section of damaged wall collapsed. Andreas barely noticed anymore. Death had become so commonplace that it registered only as a logistical problem, bodies to be cleared and positions to be refilled. By dawn, they had sealed the breach, but Andreas knew it was temporary, that tomorrow or the next day, the cannons would open it again, and they would repeat this ritual until there was nothing left to repair. He returned to his investigation exhausted and covered in blood that wasn't his own, his mind struggling to focus on anything beyond the immediate demands of survival. But Emperor Constantine sent another message, this one more urgent. A second coded communication had been intercepted, this time arranging a specific meeting between the traitor and a Turkish intermediary. The meeting was scheduled for tonight at an abandoned monastery outside the walls, in the no-man's land between the city and the Ottoman siege lines. Constantine ordered Andreas to set an ambush, to capture the traitor in the act and bring him back for public execution. Andreas read the message twice, feeling sick, because the monastery mentioned was one that Demetrios had visited frequently before the siege, a place their father had taken them as children to pray and study with the monks. Andreas gathered 6 trusted soldiers, men he had served with for years, and explained the mission without mentioning his personal suspicions. They would position themselves around the monastery after dark, wait for the traitor to arrive, then capture him when the Turkish contact appeared. His men accepted the orders without question, their faces showing nothing but grim determination to catch whoever was betraying their dying city. Andreas equipped himself with sword and dagger, checking the weapons with mechanical precision, while his thoughts churned with scenarios he didn't want to consider. If Demetrios was the traitor, what would Andreas do? Execute his own brother? Warn him and become a traitor himself? Let him escape and live with the guilt of abandoned duty? They left the city through a small postern gate just after sunset, moving quickly across the devastated landscape between the walls and the Ottoman lines. The area had once been farms and orchards, but now it was a wasteland of burned trees and churned mud, pockmarked with craters from missed cannonballs and littered with debris from failed assaults. Andreas led his men in a wide arc to avoid Turkish patrols, using the gathering darkness as cover, his senses heightened by danger and dread. The monastery appeared as a black silhouette against the darkening sky. Its dome collapsed from artillery fire, its walls scorched and broken. They took positions in the ruins, hiding among fallen stones and shattered icons, waiting in silence broken only by distant cannon fire and the screams of wounded men in the Ottoman camp. An hour passed, then 2. Andreas began to hope the intelligence was wrong, that nobody would come, that he could report failure and continue his investigation elsewhere. Then he heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the city, a single person moving carefully through the rubble. Andreas's heart hammered against his ribs as a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and hooded, carrying a leather satchel. The person moved with familiar grace, a walk Andreas had known since childhood. He watched as his brother Demetrios entered the ruined monastery, looked around nervously, then sat on a fallen column to wait. Andreas felt something break inside him, a foundation of certainty crumbling like the city walls, leaving only confusion and pain. Before Andreas could decide what to do, a second figure appeared from the opposite direction, a Turkish officer in elaborate armor, moving with the confidence of someone under diplomatic protection. Andreas recognized him from previous parleys as one of Sultan Mehmed's personal staff, a man named Mahmud who spoke perfect Greek and had negotiated several prisoner exchanges. The officer approached Demetrios with no apparent fear, greeting him like an expected business partner rather than an enemy. Andreas couldn't hear their conversation from his hiding position, but he watched his brother remove documents from the satchel and hand them to the Turk, watched money change hands, watched his brother betray everything Andreas had spent his life defending. The rage that filled him was almost welcome, simpler than the grief and confusion that lurked beneath it. Andreas signaled his men, and they emerged from hiding with swords drawn, surrounding the 2 conspirators before either could react. Demetrios' face went white when he saw Andreas, shock and horror replacing the nervous tension he'd shown moments before. The Turkish officer reached for his weapon, but stopped when 3 sword points pressed against his throat. Andreas walked slowly toward his brother, each step feeling like moving through water, his mind unable to fully process what was happening. Demetrios started to speak, but Andreas cut him off with a gesture, his voice coming out harsh and strangled when he finally found words. Don't say anything. Don't make excuses. Just tell me if there's anyone else involved, if this conspiracy goes deeper than you and whatever promises this Turk made you. Demetrios shook his head, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking as he answered. It's just me, Andreas. Nobody else knows. I did this alone because someone had to, because Constantine is leading everyone to slaughter for the sake of his pride and his legacy. Those documents show him safe routes to evacuate civilians, children, who don't need to die for a city that's already lost. The money is for bribes to get people through the siege lines. Not for me. I don't want anything except to save lives that can still be saved. His words came out in a desperate rush, pleading for understanding that Andreas couldn't give, begging for mercy that contradicted everything Andreas believed about duty and honor, and the difference between right and wrong. Andreas looked at the documents Demetrios had sold, spread them on the ground, and read them by moonlight, while his men held both prisoners at sword point. They weren't military secrets or defensive weaknesses. They were civilian evacuation routes, maps showing safe passages through the Ottoman lines, names of Turkish officers willing to accept bribes to look the other way while refugees escaped. Demetrios had been negotiating not surrender, but rescue, trying to save people who would otherwise die when the walls finally fell. Andreas understood immediately what this meant, understood that his brother had committed treason for genuinely noble reasons, and that understanding made everything infinitely worse because it meant there was no clear villain to hate, no simple answer to what justice required. The Turkish officer spoke then, his Greek formal and carefully neutral. Your brother came to us a month ago with a proposal, safe passage for civilians in exchange for information that would minimize bloodshed when the city falls. Sultan Mehmed approved because he wants Constantinople intact, not burned and massacred. We gain a city worth ruling. You save people who matter more than walls and pride. Everyone benefits except those who prefer glorious death to pragmatic survival. His words were calculated to provoke, and they succeeded. Andreas felt rage surge through him again, his hand moving to his sword before conscious thought could intervene. One of his soldiers, a young man named Alexios, spoke up with barely controlled fury. He's a traitor, and this Turk is an invader. We should kill them both right here and let the crows have them. Andreas knew what he should do according to law and duty. Arrest both men, bring them before Emperor Constantine, watch them be executed publicly as examples to discourage further betrayal. But he also knew what that would accomplish. 2 more deaths added to thousands. Civilian escape routes closed off. Children trapped in a city that would become a charnel house when the walls fell. His father's last words echoed in his memory. Protect what matters, not just what you're ordered to protect. Andreas had always interpreted that as meaning protect the city, protect Byzantine civilization, protect the emperor and everything he represented. Now, looking at his crying brother and the documents describing escape routes for innocents, he wondered if he had been protecting the wrong things all along, if honor and duty were just elaborate names for choosing death over life. He made his decision with a clarity that felt like surrender. Andreas ordered his men to bind both prisoners and march them back to the city, ignoring Demetrios's pleas and the Turkish officer's calm acceptance. They moved quickly through the darkness, Andreas's mind racing with plans and consequences and the knowledge that everything was about to change. He would bring his brother before the emperor as ordered, would present the evidence, and let Constantine decide their fates. But he also knew that decision would force Andreas to choose between executing his brother or defying his emperor, and either choice would destroy the man he had been. The siege had broken the city's walls piece by piece, and now it was breaking him the same way, cracking the foundations of belief that had held him together through 15 years of war. Andreas locked his brother in a storage room beneath the barracks rather than the imperial dungeons, buying himself time to think before presenting Demetrios to Emperor Constantine. The Turkish officer Mahmud was placed under guard in a separate cell, treated according to diplomatic protocol despite being caught in an act of conspiracy. Andreas posted his most trusted men outside both doors, with orders to let nobody enter or leave, then spent the night pacing the ramparts, trying to make sense of his situation. Dawn brought another Ottoman bombardment, the cannons opening craters in walls that had already been patched 3 times, and Andreas threw himself into the work of emergency repairs because physical exhaustion was preferable to the thoughts churning through his mind. His hands bled from hauling timber, his shoulders screamed from lifting stones, but the pain was clean and simple compared to the moral tangle waiting for him below ground. By midday, Andreas could no longer delay the inevitable. He descended to the storage room where Demetrios sat on the floor with his head in his hands, looking smaller and younger than his 28 years. When Andreas entered, his brother looked up with red-rimmed eyes and started speaking before Andreas could say anything. "I know you think I'm a coward and a traitor, that father would be ashamed of me, that everything I've done is inexcusable. But Andreas, I've spent the last month carrying messages through this dying city, watching children starve in the streets, seeing mothers throw themselves into the sea rather than watch their families die slowly. The emperor knows we're lost, but he won't surrender because his pride won't allow it. Someone had to do something, had to at least try to save the people who don't care about Byzantine glory or imperial legacy, who just want to live." His voice cracked with exhaustion and desperation, and Andreas heard truth in every word, even as he wished he could dismiss them as self-serving justification. Andreas sat down across from his brother, the stone floor cold through his armor, and for the first time allowed himself to really consider Demetrios's perspective rather than simply condemning it. "Tell me everything. When you started, who you've been working with, what exactly you promised the Turks. If I'm going to present this to Constantine, I need to understand the full scope of what you've done." Demetrios took a shaking breath and began explaining how he had made contact with Sultan Mehmed's diplomats through intermediaries in the Venetian quarter, how he had offered civilian intelligence in exchange for safe passage routes, how he had used his own money to bribe Turkish officers into allowing refugees through the siege lines at night. Over the past 3 weeks, he had helped evacuate 200 people, mostly women, children, and elderly, who now lived in refugee camps behind Ottoman lines rather than trapped in the doomed city. The scale of it shocked Andreas more than the betrayal itself. This wasn't a single desperate act, but a sustained campaign of treason that had been happening right under his nose, while he focused on defending walls and following orders. Demetrios explained that he had falsified courier reports to cover his movements, forged documents to access restricted areas, and carefully selected information that would help civilians without significantly weakening military defenses. I never gave them anything that would help them break through the walls faster or cost soldiers' lives unnecessarily. Everything I traded was about what happens after the city falls, routes for people to escape, names of officers willing to show mercy, locations where civilians are sheltering so the Turks can avoid massacring them by accident. Demetrios's voice carried pride alongside guilt, as if he believed his careful calibration of betrayal somehow made it acceptable. Andreas wanted to hate him, wanted to feel righteous anger that would make his duty clear and simple. Instead, he felt admiration mixed with horror, respect tangled with revulsion, because Demetrios had shown courage of a different kind than battlefield valor. You're still a traitor. You broke your oath to the emperor, sold information to enemies, collaborated with invaders. The fact that you did it for good reasons doesn't change what it is. Constantine will have you executed publicly, and he'll be right to do it, because if we don't enforce oaths and duty, then nothing holds civilization together. Even as Andreas spoke these words, he heard how hollow they sounded, how much like rationalizations for avoiding harder questions about what duty meant when following orders guaranteed death for innocence. Demetrios met his eyes with unexpected steadiness. Then execute me. But first, let me show you something that might change your mind about who the real traitor is. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a folded letter bearing the imperial seal, badly hidden in a pocket Andreas had somehow missed when searching him the previous night. Andreas took it carefully, breaking the wax and unfolding parchment that turned out to be a private communication from Emperor Constantine to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Andreas read it once quickly, then again slowly, his hands beginning to shake as the implications became clear. The letter acknowledged that the city's fall was inevitable, and had been since the siege began, that Western reinforcements were a fantasy Constantine had encouraged to maintain morale, that surrender was militarily rational but politically impossible because the emperor's legitimacy depended on defiant resistance. The letter continued with even more damning admissions. Constantine wrote that he preferred death in battle to survival through surrender, that he would rather be remembered as the last Byzantine emperor who died with honor than the one who handed Constantinople to the Turks. Most horrifying was the final paragraph, where Constantine calculated that maximum resistance until total collapse would secure his historical legacy, even though it would cost thousands of civilian lives that could be saved through negotiated terms. Andreas read this section 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing, feeling his entire understanding of duty and honor crack like cannon-damaged walls. Where did you get this? It could be forged, a Turkish trick to undermine confidence in the emperor. But even as he said it, Andreas recognized Constantine's handwriting and the specific phrasing the emperor used in private communications. Demetrios's voice was bitter, but controlled. I found it by accident 2 weeks ago when delivering other messages to the Patriarch. It was left on a desk, probably not meant to be seen by anyone except the church leadership. I made a copy before anyone noticed. That's when I knew that I wasn't betraying the city. Constantine already betrayed it by choosing his legacy over the people he's supposed to protect. I'm just trying to save whoever I can from his vanity. Andreas wanted to argue, wanted to defend his emperor and the principles of loyalty he had built his life around, but the letter in his hands made those defenses impossible. Constantine knew they were doomed and chose to let everyone die rather than negotiate survival. That was a betrayal worse than anything Demetrios had done. a violation of the fundamental contract between ruler and ruled. Andreas stood abruptly and left the storage room without another word, needing air and space to process what he had learned. He found Kostas on the walls, supervising repairs to a new breach, and pulled the veteran aside to a quiet corner. If you knew the Emperor was leading us to certain death for personal glory rather than military necessity, would that change your willingness to follow orders? Kostas looked at him with ancient eyes that had seen too many commanders make too many choices, and his answer came slowly but firmly. I've served 6 emperors across 3 decades. Most of them were vain. Some were incompetent. A few were actively cruel. I followed orders because the alternative was chaos, and chaos kills more people than bad leadership. But if an emperor knowingly sacrificed his people for nothing, except how history would remember him, that's not leadership. That's murder, dressed up in purple robes. Andreas spent the afternoon questioning other soldiers and officers, carefully probing their thoughts about the siege and their loyalty to Constantine without revealing what he knew. The responses painted a consistent picture. Everyone understood the city was lost. Most resented the emperor's refusal to negotiate terms. Many would support surrender if it saved civilian lives. The defense continued, not from belief in victory, but from lack of alternatives and the basic human need to do something, rather than simply wait for death. Andreas realized that he wasn't the only one questioning orders, that doubt and disillusionment were spreading through the ranks like disease, that the army holding the walls together was already psychologically defeated even as they mechanically performed their duties. That evening, Andreas visited his mother Irene at her scriptorium, finding her copying manuscripts by candlelight with hands gnarled by arthritis and ink stained from decades of work. She looked up when he entered, her face lighting with joy that made his chest ache. Both my sons in one day. What fortune! Demetrios was here this morning, helping me move some of the older manuscripts to a more secure location. He looked terrible, Andreas, like he hasn't slept in weeks. Are you taking care of each other? Andreas felt his careful composure crack at the innocence of her question, at the realization that she had no idea one son had arrested the other for treason. He sat beside her and took her ink-stained hands in his, trying to figure out how to explain that her family was about to be destroyed one way or another. But before he could speak, cannon fire erupted closer than usual, followed by shouting and the distinctive crash of collapsing masonry. Andreas ran outside to see a major section of the southern wall had finally failed completely, creating a breach wide enough for a column of soldiers to march through. Ottoman troops were already forming up for an assault, preparing to exploit the opening before defenders could organize a response. Andreas sprinted toward the breach, shouting for every available soldier to converge on that position, knowing this could be the decisive moment of the siege. Behind him, his mother stood in the doorway of her scriptorium, calling his name, but he didn't look back because soldiers were already dying, and duty demanded he be there, even though everything he had believed about duty was now compromised and corrupted beyond recognition. The battle for the breach lasted through the night, a desperate close-quarter struggle where Andreas and 500 defenders held off waves of Ottoman infantry trying to force their way into the city. Andreas fought mechanically, his sword rising and falling with practiced precision, his body moving through familiar patterns of violence while his mind remained detached and numb. Men died around him. Some he knew by name, and others he had never noticed before, and their deaths felt simultaneously significant and meaningless. By dawn they had sealed the breach with bodies as much as timber, and the Turks withdrew to regroup. Andreas stood among the carnage, covered in blood, both his own and others, and wondered what the point of this victory was when they would have to do it again tomorrow and the day after until there was nobody left to fight. He returned to the barracks to find that word of Demetrios' arrest had spread despite his orders for silence, and soldiers were demanding to know if there was really a traitor in their ranks. Andreas addressed them honestly, explaining that his brother had been negotiating with the Turks to evacuate civilians, that no military secrets had been compromised, that the situation was complicated in ways he was still trying to understand. The response surprised him. Many soldiers expressed sympathy for Demetrios' actions. Some admitted they would do the same if they could. Several quietly mentioned family members they wished could escape before the end. Andreas realized that his brother wasn't an aberration, but rather someone who had acted on thoughts that many shared, but lacked courage or opportunity to pursue. Andreas made his decision standing there among soldiers who were too exhausted and disillusioned to pretend anymore. He would not present Demetrios to Emperor Constantine for execution. Instead, he would help his brother escape the city, would provide him resources to continue evacuating civilians, would become a traitor himself because the alternative was participating in mass murder for the sake of a dead empire's pride. The decision felt less like choice and more like acceptance of something that had become inevitable the moment he read Constantine's letter admitting the whole defense was theater. Andreas knew this would destroy his honor, his reputation, his entire identity as a loyal soldier, but watching his men die for nothing had already destroyed those things. What remained was just deciding whether to acknowledge it or keep pretending. Andreas's plan to help Demetrios escape unraveled before it could begin. At dawn, imperial guards arrived at the barracks with orders signed by Emperor Constantine himself. Both Demetrios and the Turkish officer Mahmud were to be transferred immediately to the palace dungeons for formal interrogation and trial. Andreas watched helplessly as his brother was dragged from the storage room in chains, Demetrios' eyes meeting his with understanding rather than accusation, as if he had expected this outcome all along. The guards were led by Alexios, the same young soldier who had wanted to execute both prisoners on sight, and Andreas realized with cold certainty that someone had reported the situation directly to Constantine, bypassing Andreas' authority entirely. His window for action had closed before he even knew it was open. Andreas demanded to accompany the prisoners but was told the emperor wanted to see him separately later that afternoon. The dismissal was deliberate and humiliating, stripping Andreas of control over his own investigation and making clear that his loyalty was now suspect. He spent the morning in a fog of rage and despair, mechanically performing his duties on the walls while planning desperate schemes to break Demetrios out of the palace dungeons. Each plan was more impossible than the last. The dungeons were heavily guarded. Any rescue attempt would require multiple conspirators, and success would mean fleeing the city with Ottoman armies on all sides. Costas found him staring at nothing and delivered unwelcome news in a flat voice. They're saying the emperor plans a public execution for tomorrow at noon in the Hippodrome. He wants everyone to see what happens to traitors. Wants to make an example that will restore order and discipline. The afternoon summons came as Andreas expected, delivered by the same palace servant who had brought the original investigation orders a lifetime ago. Andreas walked through Constantinople's streets, noticing details he had ignored before: the desperate faces of starving children, the hollow eyes of mothers who had already given up hope, the elderly sitting motionless, in doorways, waiting for death. These were the people Demetrios had tried to save, the ones Emperor Constantine had decided were acceptable losses for historical legacy. Andreas felt his remaining loyalty to the emperor crumble completely, replaced by something harder and colder than simple anger. By the time he reached the Blachernae Palace, he had made a decision that would either save his brother or destroy them both, and he was surprised to discover he didn't particularly care which outcome occurred. Constantine received him in the same chamber overlooking the Sea of Marmara, but this time the emperor wasn't alone. 3 other senior commanders stood present, men Andreas had served with for years, officers whose judgment and loyalty were unquestionable. The emperor spoke without preamble, his voice sharp with controlled fury. Your brother's treachery is worse than we initially believed. Under interrogation, he confessed to evacuating over 200 civilians through Ottoman lines, providing detailed intelligence about our defensive positions, and coordinating with multiple Turkish officers over the course of a month. He also claims to have documentary evidence that I knowingly prolonged this siege for personal glory rather than military necessity. I assume you're aware of this absurd accusation, given that you spent several hours with him before reporting to me. Andreas met the emperor's eyes directly, seeing behind the anger to the fear and calculation underneath. Constantine knew about the letter, knew that Demetrios had proof of his betrayal, and was moving to discredit that evidence before it could undermine his authority. The other commanders watched Andreas with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion, waiting to see how he would respond. Andreas made a choice that felt like stepping off a cliff. The accusation isn't absurd, Your Majesty. I've seen the letter you sent to the Patriarch, acknowledging that the defense is militarily hopeless and that you're prolonging it for legacy rather than victory. My brother didn't forge it. Your own handwriting and seal prove its authenticity. You've been lying to everyone about our chances while people die in your name. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by distant cannon fire and the labored breathing of 5 men processing treason spoken aloud. One of the commanders, an older general named Francis, moved his hand toward his sword before stopping himself. Constantine's face went white, then red, rage warring with calculation as he decided how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. You're accusing your emperor of betrayal while defending your brother's admitted treason? Either you've lost your mind from exhaustion and grief, or you've joined his conspiracy. Which is it, Andreas? Because the only way you leave this room alive is if you recant immediately and help me execute your brother tomorrow as an example of what happens to those who break their oaths. Andreas felt a strange calm settle over him, the peace that comes from finally abandoning pretense and speaking truth regardless of consequences. I'm not recanting anything. You've known since the siege began that we can't win, that Western reinforcements aren't coming, that surrender on negotiated terms would save thousands of lives. But you chose pride over pragmatism, legacy over lives, and now you're executing the one person who actually tried to save innocent people from your vanity. That's not leadership, Your Majesty. That's murder dressed up as honor. The words came out steady and clear, and Andreas watched them land like physical blows, saw Constantine's carefully maintained composure crack as the accusation echoed in the marble chamber. Francis drew his sword fully now, leveling it at Andreas with practiced steadiness. That's enough. You'll be arrested for treason alongside your brother and you'll both die together tomorrow as examples of what happens when family loyalty corrupts military duty." But before anyone could move, another commander, a younger officer named Michael, spoke up with unexpected firmness. "Wait. Before we start arresting people for speaking uncomfortable truths, I want to see this letter Andreas mentioned. If Emperor Constantine really did acknowledge that the defense is hopeless while ordering us to fight to the death anyway, that changes everything about who the traitors actually are in this situation." His intervention created space for doubt, and Andreas saw the same question in the eyes of the third commander, a pragmatic Genoese mercenary captain named Giovanni, who served for gold rather than ideology. Constantine recognized the danger immediately and tried to reassert control. "There is no letter. It's a fabrication, a Turkish forgery designed to undermine unity at our most desperate hour. Andreas has been manipulated by his brother's lies, and now he's spreading sedition that will destroy whatever chance we have left. I'm ordering all of you to arrest him now, and if you refuse, that's proof you're part of the conspiracy." But the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him, the slight tremor that suggested he was afraid rather than righteously angry. Giovanni laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I've been paid to die defending these walls, Your Majesty, but I wasn't paid to die for lies. If there's evidence you've been prolonging this siege for personal reasons rather than military ones, I want to see it before I follow any more orders." What happened next unfolded with dreamlike inevitability. Andreas produced Demetrios's copy of the letter from inside his armor, where he had hidden it that morning, with some half-formed idea it might be useful. He handed it to Michael, who read it carefully before passing it to Giovanni, and then, reluctantly, to Francis. Each man's expression changed as they processed Constantine's own words, admitting what they had all suspected but never voiced, that the emperor had chosen glorious death over pragmatic survival, that maximum resistance served his legacy rather than the city's welfare, that he considered civilian casualties acceptable prices for historical remembrance. Francis finished reading and let the letter fall from his hands, his sword lowering as something fundamental broke in his bearing. Constantine made one final attempt to salvage his authority. "Even if that letter is genuine, it changes nothing about your duty to obey orders and maintain discipline. I'm still your emperor, still the legitimate ruler of Byzantium, and I'm commanding you to arrest Andreas Palaiologos for treason and sedition." But his voice carried no conviction anymore, and nobody moved to obey. Michael spoke slowly, choosing words with visible care. "Your Majesty, with respect, you forfeited our loyalty by betraying the basic contract between ruler and ruled. We'll continue defending the walls because Ottoman conquest is worse than Byzantine incompetence, but we're no longer executing people for trying to save lives you've decided are expendable." Giovanni nodded agreement, and even Francis, whose family had served Byzantine emperors for generations, couldn't muster the will to argue. Andreas seized the moment before Constantine could recover. "I'm going to the dungeons to free my brother and Mahmud. They'll continue evacuating civilians through Turkish lines until the city falls, which we all know is coming within weeks at most. Anyone who wants to help can join me. Anyone who wants to stop me can try, but understand that you'll be defending a lie rather than duty." He turned and walked toward the door, half expecting a sword in his back, but receiving nothing except silence. Michael followed first, then Giovanni, and finally even Francis joined them after a long moment of internal struggle. Constantine shouted orders and threats behind them, his voice rising to a desperate pitch. but the words bounced off marble walls without effect, because authority without legitimacy is just noise. The palace dungeons were guarded by soldiers who looked at the four commanders with confusion when they demanded access to the prisoners. Andreas explained the situation in broad strokes. The emperor had been lying about the siege. They were rescuing people who tried to save civilians. Anyone who objected could take it up with Constantine personally. Most guards simply stepped aside, unwilling to fight senior officers over prisoners they barely cared about. One young soldier tried to resist, and Francis disarmed him with casual efficiency, though without unnecessary violence. They found Demetrios and Mahmoud in adjacent cells, both bruised from interrogation, but still coherent. Demetrios looked at Andreas with shock that transformed into tentative hope when he saw the other commanders standing behind him. Andreas unlocked the cells personally, the keys taken from the chief jailer, who had wisely chosen not to interfere. "We're getting you out of the city tonight, both of you. You'll continue the evacuation work. Save whoever you can before the end comes. I'm done pretending that defending walls matters more than protecting people. Done serving an emperor who chose his legacy over his subjects." Demetrios embraced him fiercely, whispering thanks into his shoulder, while Andreas stood rigid, still processing the magnitude of what he had just done. Mahmoud bowed respectfully to all of them, his diplomatic training showing even in these bizarre circumstances. "Sultan Mehmed will honor his agreements about civilian safety. Your brother has saved many lives already, and together we can save many more. This is the right choice, even if it feels like betrayal." They left the dungeons to find the palace in chaos, servants running in random directions while imperial guards argued about conflicting orders. Constantine had apparently sealed himself in his chambers, leaving the entire command structure in paralysis as officers tried to figure out whether to enforce the emperor's authority or acknowledge its collapse. Andreas and his group moved quickly toward the postern gate they had used for the monastery ambush, knowing they had perhaps an hour before someone organized pursuit. Michael provided them with travel documents and safe passage tokens, while Giovanni contributed gold coins for bribes and emergency supplies. Francis said nothing but pressed his family signet ring into Demetrios' hand, a gesture whose meaning was clear. If the old general's family needed evacuation, Demetrios was to help them escape. At the postern gate, Andreas faced the final decision point. He could return to his command, claim temporary madness from stress and grief, attempt to salvage some remnant of his military career, or he could accompany his brother into exile, completing his transformation from loyal soldier to active traitor. Demetrios made the choice easier by speaking first. "You need to stay, Andreas. The walls still need defending until we can evacuate everyone who wants to leave. The soldiers trust you, and they'll need leadership that isn't corrupted by Constantine's lies. I can handle the Ottoman negotiations myself, but the city needs you here." The logic was sound, and Andreas recognized it as truth, even though every instinct screamed to protect his brother personally rather than abstractly. Andreas embraced Demetrios one final time, then watched him disappear into darkness alongside Mahmoud, two traitors who had become the only honest men in Constantinople. He turned back toward the city feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously, freed from illusions but burdened with new responsibilities that had no clear guidelines or traditions to follow. When he returned to the barracks, Kostas was waiting with a simple question. "Did you free him?" Andreas nodded. "Then you did the right thing, even if it's the wrong thing, according to everything we were taught. Now we figure out how to defend these walls while helping people escape them, and we hope That's enough to live with when this is all over. The next 2 weeks transformed Constantinople's defense into something unprecedented, a military resistance that simultaneously facilitated civilian evacuation through enemy lines. Andreas coordinated with Demetrios through coded messages delivered by trusted couriers, identifying families who wanted to escape and timing evacuations around Ottoman artillery schedules. Each night, small groups of civilians slipped through postern gates and made their way to predetermined meeting points, where Mahmud's network guided them safely through Turkish positions. The operation required Andreas to maintain the fiction of total resistance while secretly undermining it, defending walls during the day and arranging their circumvention at night. The moral contradiction should have torn him apart, but instead he felt more purposeful than he had in months, finally protecting what actually mattered rather than symbols and abstractions. Emperor Constantine noticed something had changed, but lacked the authority to stop it. After the confrontation in the palace, word had spread among the officer corps that the emperor had knowingly prolonged a hopeless siege for personal glory. Many commanders continued following orders out of habit and lack of alternatives, but the absolute loyalty that had sustained morale through the darkest moments was gone, replaced by grudging professionalism and barely concealed resentment. Constantine tried to reassert control through increasingly desperate measures, public speeches about Byzantine honor, promises of miraculous Western reinforcements that everyone knew were fantasies, threats of execution for defeatism that nobody took seriously anymore. Andreas watched the emperor's authority dissolve like walls under cannon fire, eroded not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet refusal to pretend anymore. The Ottoman assault intensified as Sultan Mehmed sensed the defense weakening. Massive bombardments continued from dawn to dusk. Turkish engineers dug tunnels under the walls, attempting to collapse them from below, and elite Janissary units probed for weak points with increasing frequency. Andreas and his men fought desperately to hold each breach, knowing that every day they maintained the walls was another day for civilians to evacuate. The contradiction of dying to defend a city while helping people escape it created a surreal atmosphere where soldiers joked about their own absurdity, fighting with maximum effort while acknowledging minimum purpose. Costas summed it up during one brutal engagement where they held a breach against 3 waves of Janissaries. "We're buying time. We don't have to save people from a fate we can't prevent. It's the stupidest thing I've done in 30 years of stupid military decisions, and somehow it's the first one that actually feels honorable." Andreas's mother, Irene, figured out what was happening when he helped evacuate the neighboring family whose children she had taught to read. She confronted him in the scriptorium one evening, her aged face showing more understanding than judgment. "You're helping people leave, aren't you? Working with Demetrios somehow, getting families through the siege lines. Don't deny it, Andreas. I've watched you both since you were children, and I know when my sons are conspiring together." Andreas started to deflect but stopped, too exhausted for more lies. He confirmed everything, expecting anger or fear, but receiving neither. Instead, his mother embraced him with fierce pride. "Your father told you to protect what matters, not just what you're ordered to protect. It took you long enough to understand what he meant, but I'm glad you finally did. Now help me pack the most valuable manuscripts because they're leaving with the next group of refugees, and I'm staying here to make sure nobody loots this place after I'm gone." The arrangement with Mahmud expanded beyond simple civilian evacuation. The Turkish officer provided intelligence about Ottoman assault plans, allowing Andreas to anticipate attacks and position forces more effectively. In exchange, Andreas shared information about Byzantine defensive weaknesses that would minimize casualties on both sides when the final assault came. It was collaboration with the enemy, treason by any traditional definition, but Andreas had stopped caring about definitions and started caring only about results. The bitter irony was that this cooperation made him more effective as a military commander. His success rate in defending breaches improved dramatically once he knew where the real attacks would focus versus the diversionary ones. Soldiers noticed and attributed it to tactical brilliance, never suspecting their commander was receiving help from the army trying to kill them. Everything accelerated in late May when Ottoman tunnels finally succeeded in collapsing a major section of the inner wall near the Gate of St. Romanus. The breach was catastrophic, creating an opening 50 feet wide that no amount of timber and rubble could adequately seal. Andreas rushed every available soldier to the gap, knowing this was likely the beginning of the end. They fought through the day and into the night, holding back wave after wave of Turkish infantry who sensed victory and pressed forward with renewed fury. Andreas killed men whose faces he would remember forever, fought alongside soldiers who died within arm's reach, and felt his body move with mechanical precision, while his mind observed from somewhere distant and detached. By midnight, they had stabilized the breach through sheer expenditure of lives, but everyone knew it was temporary. The walls that had protected Constantinople for 1,000 years were finally failing in a fundamental way that couldn't be repaired. Andreas met with Michael, Giovanni, and Francis in an emergency council after the battle, all of them covered in blood and soot, all of them understanding what none wanted to say aloud. Giovanni spoke first with characteristic bluntness. We have perhaps 3 days before the Turks mass for a final assault through that breach. Maybe a week if we're extremely lucky and they're extremely cautious. Any civilians who haven't evacuated yet need to leave immediately, tonight if possible, because once the city falls, there won't be time for organized escapes. Michael added that Constantine had locked himself in the imperial apartments and was refusing to see anyone, apparently praying constantly and waiting for God to deliver a miracle that elementary mathematics proved impossible. Francis reported that several noble families were attempting to bribe Genoese ship captains for passage, driving prices so high that only the wealthy could afford escape, while common people remained trapped. Andreas made a decision that would define his final days. He sent word to Dimitrios through their usual courier network. All remaining evacuation efforts should focus exclusively on common people, the poor and vulnerable, who lacked resources to save themselves. Noble families who could afford bribes would have to manage their own escapes. The message included specific locations where civilians were sheltering, mostly in churches and monasteries, along with a proposed schedule for moving them out over the next 72 hours. It was a massive operation that would require Ottoman cooperation on an unprecedented scale, essentially asking Mehmed to deliberately slow his final assault to allow more evacuation time. Andreas had no idea if the Sultan would agree, but Dimitrios's response came back within hours. Mehmed had accepted the proposal because conquering an empty city cost less than conquering a defended one, and civilians who escaped peacefully wouldn't need to be dealt with through massacre or enslavement after victory. The final 3 days of Constantinople's independence became a strange collaboration between enemies. Ottoman bombardment continued, but avoided areas where civilians were gathering for evacuation. Turkish patrols around the siege lines received orders to allow refugees through designated corridors. Andreas and his remaining soldiers defended the walls with maximum effort during daylight hours, then quietly facilitated civilian movements at night. They saved approximately 1,500 people during those final days, not everyone who wanted to leave, not even half of those who deserved saving, but more than would have survived the final assault and subsequent occupation. Andreas watched them go with mixed feelings, glad they would live, but knowing his own survival was increasingly unlikely. He had crossed too many lines, made too many enemies, accumulated too much guilt to simply walk away when the end came. Emperor Constantine emerged from seclusion on the final day, appearing on the walls in full imperial regalia, despite Andreas's warnings that Turkish snipers targeted anyone in elaborate clothing. The emperor addressed the remaining defenders with a speech about honor and sacrifice and Byzantine glory, beautiful words that meant nothing because everyone knew he was describing his own priorities rather than theirs. Constantine seemed to have retreated into fantasy, genuinely believing that God would intervene or Western crusaders would arrive, or some miracle would reverse mathematics and logistics. Andreas watched and felt pity mixed with contempt, recognizing that Constantine had become a prisoner of his own legend, unable to acknowledge reality, because doing so would mean admitting his entire reign had been a failure. When the speech ended, soldiers applauded politely and returned to their positions, and nobody's morale improved because morale required belief, and belief required honesty. The final Ottoman assault began at dawn on May 29th, announced by the largest artillery bombardment of the entire siege. Every Turkish cannon fired simultaneously, a rolling thunder that shook the ground and turned the air thick with smoke and dust. Andreas stood at the breach near the gate of St. Romanus, surrounded by 200 exhausted men who knew they were making their last stand. Behind them, the city was nearly empty. Most civilians had either evacuated or retreated to churches for final prayers. Andreas thought about his mother, who had refused to leave her scriptorium, about Demetrios, somewhere beyond the siege lines, about his father, who had died defending another hopeless position 20 years ago. He wondered if his father had felt this same mixture of resignation and relief, the peace that came from finally having simple clarity about duty after months of moral confusion. The Turkish infantry came in massive waves, thousands of soldiers pouring through the breach with ladders and grappling hooks, overwhelming defenders through sheer numerical superiority. Andreas fought with everything he had learned over 15 years of warfare, his sword moving with precision earned through countless battles, his body remembering patterns his conscious mind had forgotten. Men died around him. Costas took an arrow through the throat and fell without a sound. Young Alexios was crushed under a collapsing wall section. Others simply disappeared into the chaos of close combat. Andreas killed and killed and kept killing until his arms went numb and his vision narrowed to a tunnel, aware on some level that this was how he would die, but finding he didn't particularly mind. It was cleaner than living with what he had done, simpler than figuring out how to exist in whatever world came after this one. But death didn't come. Instead, Andreas found himself surrounded by Turkish soldiers who had orders to capture rather than kill senior Byzantine officers. They disarmed him efficiently, binding his hands and dragging him away from the breach as the final defense collapsed and Ottoman forces poured into Constantinople. He watched from captivity as the city he had defended for months finally fell, Turkish flags rising over walls he had bled to protect, soldiers spreading through streets that moments ago had been Byzantine. The sight should have devastated him, but instead produced only numbness. Constantinople had been dead since the siege began. They had simply delayed the funeral, bought time for people to escape, transformed inevitable defeat into something marginally less catastrophic. Andreas had failed to save the city, but he had succeeded in saving some of its people. Whether that counted as victory or just a different flavor of failure was a question he no longer had the energy to answer. Andreas spent 3 days in a Turkish military tent under guard that was more protective than punitive, treated as a valuable prisoner rather than a common soldier. Sultan Mehmed had ordered that senior Byzantine officers be kept alive for potential diplomatic purposes, though what diplomacy remained after conquest was unclear. Through the canvas walls, Andreas heard Constantinople being transformed. Turkish soldiers methodically looting the wealthier districts, Christian churches being converted to mosques, the screams of those who had hidden rather than evacuated gradually fading into silence. On the second day, Mahmud visited him with news delivered in that carefully neutral diplomatic tone. Emperor Constantine IV had died fighting at the walls, his body found among common soldiers, stripped of imperial regalia and identifiable only by the purple boots he wore. Andreas felt nothing at this information, no grief or satisfaction, just acknowledgement that another part of the old world had ended. On the fourth day, Demetrios arrived with documents securing Andreas's release. His brother looked older, his face lined with exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness, the weight of responsibility for those 1,500 evacuated civilians visible in every gesture. They embraced briefly, then sat in awkward silence because there was too much to say and no adequate words to say it. Demetrios finally spoke in a voice rough from overuse. Most of the people we evacuated are in refugee camps south of here. Sultan Mehmed has agreed to let them settle in Ottoman territories or travel west if they have resources. Mahmud helped negotiate protections, minimal but better than nothing. Your mother refused to leave her scriptorium. They found her there 2 days ago, surrounded by manuscripts she was still copying when the soldiers came in. She didn't suffer. I made sure to verify that personally. Andreas absorbed this information the same way he had absorbed everything else lately, filing it away in some mental space where grief lived alongside guilt and regret and the dull acceptance of consequences. Andreas asked about the other commanders who had helped free Demetrios from the palace dungeons. Michael had died defending the northern walls, killed by a cannonball that left nothing recognizable to bury. Giovanni had escaped on a Genoese ship hours before the final assault, taking payment from several noble families and disappearing toward Italy with no intention of ever returning. Francis had surrendered to Ottoman officers and was currently imprisoned pending decisions about his fate. The old general had apparently requested execution rather than serving new masters, but Mehmed was considering keeping him alive for administrative purposes, since experienced bureaucrats were valuable regardless of their previous loyalties. Each outcome felt appropriate in its own way, rewards and punishments distributed according to some logic. Andreas no longer had the energy to interpret. Demetrios arranged passage for Andreas on a merchant ship leaving for Crete, one of the few remaining Venetian-controlled islands, where Byzantine refugees gathered to argue about restoration and rebuilding that would never happen. Andreas accepted because staying in occupied Constantinople was impossible, and because Crete was as good a destination as anywhere for someone with no remaining purpose or plans. The night before departure, Demetrios took him to see what remained of their childhood home near the Church of the Holy Apostles. The building had been looted and partially burned. family possessions scattered or stolen, walls blackened by smoke. They stood in the rubble without speaking, two men who had made different choices that led to the same destruction. Brothers who had betrayed everything they were raised to value and couldn't decide if that made them traitors or the only honest people in a world built on lies. Andreas broke the silence with a question he had been avoiding. Do you regret it? Any of it? The negotiations, the evacuations, becoming what we became? Demetrios considered for a long time before answering, his voice carrying conviction mixed with uncertainty. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Constantine's pride made my treason the only way to save lives. I regret every person we didn't evacuate because we ran out of time, or resources, or luck. But I don't regret choosing people over principles, pragmatism over honor, survival over glory. Those 1,500 refugees are alive because we betrayed oaths that should never have required their deaths. If that makes me a traitor, then being a traitor was the right thing to be. Andreas wanted to share that certainty, but couldn't quite reach it, stuck in a place where he understood the logic without feeling its emotional truth. The journey to Crete took 2 weeks aboard, a crowded merchant vessel filled with refugees carrying whatever possessions they had managed to salvage. Andreas spent most of the voyage on deck, staring at water and avoiding conversations with people who wanted to share stories about what they had lost and survived. He recognized some faces from the evacuation groups he had helped coordinate, families who owed their lives to his treason, but their gratitude felt worse than condemnation would have because it reminded him of everyone they hadn't saved. At night, he dreamed about the walls, about Costas dying with an arrow in his throat, about his mother copying manuscripts while Turkish soldiers approached, about Emperor Constantine making speeches nobody believed while the world ended around him. Crete was chaos organized into refugee camps, thousands of displaced Byzantines trying to build temporary lives while pretending they would eventually return home. Andreas found lodging in a boarding house run by a widow from Thessalonica who asked no questions and expected no explanations. He had some money from selling his armor and weapons, enough to survive for a few months while he figured out what came next, though he had no ideas about what next could possibly mean. Other refugees formed committees and planned impossible restoration campaigns, wrote letters to Western rulers begging for support that would never arrive, argued about who bore responsibility for the fall as if assigning blame could somehow reverse it. Andreas avoided these gatherings because he knew the answers to their questions, and those answers provided no comfort. They had lost because losing was inevitable, because empires ended when they accumulated enough internal contradictions, because pride and honor and glory were insufficient substitutes for practical adaptation. He found work eventually, helping a Venetian merchant manage warehouse inventories in Heraklion. The labor was mindless and exhausting, exactly what Andreas needed, requiring no decisions or moral judgments beyond counting crates and recording numbers. His employer asked once about his military experience, and Andreas deflected with vague references to minor commands, unwilling to explain that he had been a senior officer who helped defend and simultaneously undermine Constantinople's final siege. Evenings he spent in taverns drinking wine and listening to other refugees tell stories that grew more heroic with each retelling, transforming defeat into legend, erasing the messy reality of collaboration and compromise in favor of clean narratives about honor and sacrifice. Andreas never corrected these stories because people needed their myths. needed to believe the fall meant something beyond simple military failure and imperial incompetence. 6 months after arriving in Crete, Andreas received a letter from Demetrios forwarded through Mahmud's network. His brother had settled in Edirne, the Ottoman capital, where he worked as a translator and intermediary between Turkish authorities and Greek-speaking populations in newly conquered territories. The letter described this work without pride or shame, simply reporting that someone needed to help people navigate the new reality of Ottoman rule, and Demetrios had the language skills and connections to do it effectively. He asked if Andreas wanted to join him, suggested there was important work helping communities adapt and survive rather than fighting pointless resistance campaigns. Andreas read the letter multiple times before burning it, unable to decide if his brother had found authentic purpose or just found another way to rationalize compromise. Either interpretation could be true, and Andreas suspected Demetrios himself didn't know which was accurate. Andreas never responded to that letter or the 3 others that followed over the next year. He continued his warehouse work, continued his evening drinking, continued existing in a state that wasn't quite living, but wasn't quite surrender either. Other refugees gradually left Crete. Some returned to Ottoman territories to reclaim property. Others traveled west, seeking opportunities in Italy or France. A few joined hopeless resistance movements that would accomplish nothing except getting more people killed. Andreas stayed because leaving required making decisions, and decisions required believing his choices mattered, and he had lost that belief somewhere in Constantinople's ruins. He was 33 years old and felt 70, his body still functional, but his sense of purpose completely exhausted. 2 years after the fall, Andreas encountered Francis in a Heraklion market. The old general had been released from Ottoman custody and had made his way to Crete like so many others, carrying nothing but memories and the weight of survival when honor suggested he should have died. They shared wine at a tavern and talked around everything important, discussing weather and wine quality and merchant shipping routes, carefully avoiding Constantinople and sieges and the choices that haunted them both. Finally, Francis spoke the truth neither wanted to acknowledge. "I dream about the walls every night. Sometimes we're winning, holding back the Turks through courage and determination like we were supposed to. Other times, I dream we opened the gates on the first day, negotiated reasonable surrender terms, saved everyone who died across those months of pointless resistance. Both dreams feel equally false, like neither version captures what actually happened or what we actually did. I don't know if we were heroes or cowards or something in between that doesn't have a name yet." Andreas found himself responding with more honesty than he had managed in 2 years. "We were soldiers, following orders in a situation where following orders guaranteed disaster. Then some of us stopped following orders and tried to save people instead, which made us traitors but also meant some people survived who wouldn't have otherwise. I still don't know if that math works out to redemption or just a different category of failure. My brother thinks we did the right thing in the wrong way, that sometimes treason is more moral than loyalty when loyalty serves vanity rather than people. He might be correct, but I can't feel it as truth. I can only feel that everything was wrong, and we chose the least wrong options available, and it still resulted in catastrophe." Francis nodded slowly, his ancient eyes showing recognition rather than judgment, the understanding shared by men who had lived through situations that destroyed simple moral categories. They parted that evening with brief embraces and promises to meet again that both knew would never be kept. Andreas walked back to his boarding house through empty streets, breathing salt air and listening to waves against the harbor walls, and felt something like acceptance settle over him. He hadn't saved Constantinople, hadn't preserved Byzantine civilization, hadn't maintained his honor or served his emperor faithfully. He had betrayed oaths and collaborated with enemies and abandoned principles he had once considered absolute. But he had also helped 1,500 people escape death, had chosen pragmatism over pride when pride would have accomplished nothing except more corpses. Whether that made him a hero or a traitor or simply a man who did what seemed necessary in impossible circumstances was a question he would never answer satisfactorily. The city had fallen, the empire had ended, and Andreas had survived when perhaps he shouldn't have. He would live with that arithmetic for whatever years remained, carrying guilt and grief in proportions he couldn't balance. And that was simply how consequences worked in a world where honor and duty sometimes demanded evil and betrayal sometimes saved lives.